In this episode, we're taking care of the final piece of our gameplay ability UI. So if I hit I on my keyboard, I get my ability inventory, and I can also drag and drop anything from any slot to any other slot. I can drag it back into my inventory. Let's move something over to slot 8, hit 8 on my keyboard. Let's get to it. Hey guys, welcome to our episode today, and this is the fourth in a four-part series on setting up our gameplay ability UI, and we'll probably have more UI episodes in the future, but this is the last key one. Our next episode is more of a bonus episode. I'm just going to show you my very simple process for creating gameplay ability icons, but you could skip right over that if you've got your own ability icons. So last episode we got our ability hotbar working with our gameplay abilities, and this episode it's really two parts, because the first part is let's just get drag and drop working on our hotbar. And then the second part is setting up our inventory. And then I guess it's actually three parts, because after we set up our inventory, then we'll do drag and drop from the hotbar to the inventory and back to the hotbar. So to start, we got to go into our player controller. So I'm going to navigate to the core folder and the My Player controller that we started in episode 1 of this series. And on our player controller, we're going to create a couple of new functions, and these are going to be used for moving our abilities within the hotbar. So the first new function we need to create, I'm going to hit plus sign, and this one's going to be called move ability within hotbar. And for this function, we need a couple of inputs. So our first one is going to be from, so the slot that this is moving from, and that's going to be an integer. And then we also need a to variable, and that's also going to be an integer. And we need an output, so I'll hit plus sign, and the output we need, we're going to call that swapping, question mark. And this is going to be a Boolean. I'll create some space between these, because with the from, we're going to promote this to a local variable. And then for the local variable, we're going to rename it to local from. Connect it up here, and then the to, we're going to do the same exact thing, promote to local variable, connect it up here, and this is going to be local to. Add a reroute. So the way this is going to work is when we're moving an ability within the hotbar, we're passing in where we're getting the ability from and where it's moving to, and we first got to check, is there an ability already in the slot that we're moving to? Because if there is, then we're just going to swap. Whatever's there is going to switch to whatever spot we're taking the original one from. And so to figure out if there's something in that slot already that we're moving to, we need a reference to our local to. This is just an integer. We need a reference to our gameplay ability hotbar. And then from that, we're going to check, is this a valid index? And the index we're checking is where we're moving to. And if that's valid, we know that something is in that slot already. So that creates a branch node. And I'm going to move out our return node right here. So if this is false, that means there's nothing in that slot already, and then this is very simple. So in that case, we're just going to get our gameplay ability hotbar again, and we're going to get our local to, and from gameplay ability hotbar here, we're just going to set an array element, and the element we're going to set is the local to. Now what are we setting it to in that array? Well, we need a reference to our gameplay ability hotbar again, and we're going to get a copy, and we're going to get it at the local from, because this is moving from the hotbar slot to another hotbar slot. So this is the gameplay ability at where we're moving it from, and then it's moving into where we're moving it to. And then I'll connect up this pin here. And then we need one more local variable here, because based on whether or not we need to swap the hotbar abilities, we're going to set a Boolean variable to go into this swapping. So I'm going to create a local variable, and this is going to be titled local swapping, question mark. And then our local swapping for false here, I'm just going to set it to false, because we're not swapping. This is blank. And then I'll connect this up, move out a return node even more. And for the return node, I'm just going to get a reference to local swapping. It's going to be a get, and we're going to connect it up here. So now let's go back to what's going to happen if there is something in that slot. So what's going to happen is we need to set a temporary variable for what's already in that slot. So we can get both of these references. I'm going to paste them up here. We need to get a copy of whatever is in that slot already. And then I'm going to promote this to a local variable. And we're going to title this one, this is our local temporary gameplay ability. Temporary gameplay ability. And I'm going to connect this up to the true pin. And then what we can do is we can take our very same setup here, and we're still going to move what we're moving from to the local to. We're still going to do that on this string. So I'll paste that up here. I'm going to move the return node out even more. And what I'm going to do also is I'm just going to make some space between these. Separate them out just a little bit. So this I'll move up here, connect this up here, move these down here, move this down a little bit, and move this over there. All right, so we're storing what's already in that slot in this local temporary gameplay ability here. Now we're setting the local to with the local from. Now we need to go back to the local from, and we need to set that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy these two, paste them over here, connect this up, and now we're going to set the local from. And what are we going to set this to? Well, that's our local temporary gameplay ability, and I can connect that right here. But here's the thing. So we also need to set our local from down here. And in this case, there's nothing in our local to. So we're just moving the ability from the from to the to. So what's going to happen to the slot where the from is? We just need to clear out whatever gameplay ability is in that slot currently. So I'm going to make some space here, and I'm just going to get a reference to just these, not the local temporary gameplay ability. Paste those down there, connect this up here, and basically this is going to set that particular slot in our hotbar to blank. And then finally what we're going to do is I'm going to copy the local swapping here, paste over here, and this is going to be set to true. And that's going to be used in our return node. And the reason we need to pass through this variable is because in addition to this function, which is just moving the actual abilities themselves, we also need a function for moving the icons. And the icons, obviously, if we're swapping, we need to switch those icons with each other. And so we're going to pass this into a separate function for our icons, which is going to cause them to switch. But the last thing, I'm going to move the return node down here, and we're going to connect it up also to this. So let's just go through this really quick, make sure you've got it all, because this is a complicated function. So we're setting our local from, we're setting our local to, we're checking to see, okay, in our gameplay ability hotbar, where we're moving it to, is something in there already? If true, then we're setting a local temporary gameplay ability with whatever slot we're moving to. And the reason we're doing that is because we're erasing whatever's in the local to and we're replacing it with whatever we're moving from. And then we come back to the local from slot and we pull in our local temporary gameplay ability. We then mark this as swapping, and that's going to go into our return node. Now, all the way back here, if there's nothing already in that slot, it's a lot easier. So we just take what we're moving from and we move it to what we're moving to, and we null out what we're moving from. We don't want the ability to still be in there when we move it to the new slot. And we set local swapping to false, and then it returns. So compile and save. So now we have a second function we need to create. So I'll hit +, and this is going to be move image within hotbar. So we moved the actual ability, but we didn't move the image, the visual representation of that ability within our hotbar. And so this function is going to have 4 inputs. So our first one, you probably guessed it, it's going to be from, and this is going to be an integer. And then we also need a to, and that's also an integer. But then we need an input for our actual ability image. So ability image, and that's going to be a texture 2D, so an image file. Texture 2D object reference. And then last but not least, we need a variable for swapping, and this is going to be a Boolean. So I'll promote the first 3 to local variables. So right click, promote from to a local variable, right click, promote to a local variable, and ability image, promote to local variable. And we'll rename them all accordingly. Local from, local to, local 3. No, just kidding. Local ability image. Connect this up, connect this up. I really got to stop with the smart alecky remarks because it's going to mess someone up. Reroute, reroute. And then for the swapping here, very similar to our other function, we're just going to branch based on that. So we'll branch all the way over here. I'll add another reroute. So once again, we're going to do the false branch here first. So we're not swapping abilities. So for that, I'm going to get a reference to our local ability image, and I'm going to get a reference to our hotbar buttons. And this was a macro we built, I think it was 2 episodes ago. So I'm going to pull that in. I'll just show that really quick. It's just getting our character to our HUD, to our hotbar buttons. I did not want to have to get that every single time, so we just built a macro. So go back to the move image within hotbar. And then from this, I can get a copy. The copy we're getting is our local to. So expand local variables, local to, connect this up. And then I also need to get a copy, and I need to get our local from. And for the local to, what we're going to do is we're going to set the ability image. So we're setting the ability image for the actual ability, and we're setting it to the image that we're passing in here. So connect this up, and then the false will be connected up right here. I'm just going to move these down, create some more space. And then what are we doing for the image where we're getting that ability from? Well, we just need to null that out, right? So I can set ability image, and then that's just going to be blank. So now for our true branch, we got to do something very similar to what we did in the previous function. So I'm going to get a reference to our hotbar buttons, drag that in, and then I'll get a reference to our local to, and we have to get a copy of our hotbar button at the index local to. And then whatever's in that local to spot, we have to get the ability image in that spot because we got to set that image as a temporary variable. So I'm going to right click on this, promote to local variable. And if I come down here, I'm just going to rename it. It's going to be our local temporary ability image. And then I'll move this down and I'll connect it up to the true. And so once we've stored the local temporary ability image, then we can actually set the ability image. So set ability image. And this ability image is going to be the image that we're passing through. So our local ability image that we're passing into the function. And I'm going to move these out, make a little bit more space, connect these up. So once we set the image in our local to slot, then we have to set the image in the local from. We have to swap the images. So that's where our local temporary ability image comes in. So once again, I'm going to get a reference to our buttons, and then I'm going to get our local from variable and get a copy of the button at that index, connect this up. And from this, we're going to set our ability image and connect this up. And what we're going to set it to is our local temporary ability image. Connect this up. So let's just go through this really quick. We're setting 3 local variables. Then we're checking, okay, are we swapping ability images? If we are swapping ability images, then we're storing the image that's in our local to. We're storing that in a local temporary ability image. And then we're setting the local to slot to have the image from our local from, which is our local ability image. And then in our local from slot, we're setting the image to be the local temporary ability image. And here it's a little bit easier because there is no image. We're not swapping from one to the other. So in that case, we can just get our image. We could put it in the local to, and then for the local from, we could set the image to be blank. So let's compile and save, and now it's time to actually set up the widgets for dragging and dropping these abilities. So let's go back to our content drawer, let's go back to our content, and then the UI folder that we started 3 episodes ago. And we're going to right click, we're going to create a new user interface widget blueprint. And I'll select user widget, and then I have to go back to it, we're going to rename that. This one is going to be dragged ability. And whenever we do a drag and drop, this is going to be our visual. So let's go into that. So luckily the widget setup for this, pretty simple. So we're going to start with a size box. So we're going to do size box, drag that in. And then the next one is going to be a border. And then underneath the border is going to be an image. So we just need to make some quick updates to these. So the size box, I'll select that. We'll do a width override, a height override. That's going to be 64 by 64. And then for the border, we're going to set that in the brush color here under appearance. So we'll go to brush color. It's going to be 0 by 0 by 0, and then an alpha 0.25. So very translucent. And then for the image, well, we have to bind that to a variable because the image is actually going to change depending on whatever image we're dragging and dropping. So we got to go over to the graphs tab and we got to create a new variable. So under variables here, and I'm going to call this dragged image. And the type is going to be a texture 2D. Texture 2D object reference. And we got to make sure to make this instance editable and exposed on spawn. And then we can go back to the designer tab, and then for our brush here, we can bind our brush to the dragged image. So we'll compile and save this, and we are all set here. We got to create another blueprint though. So let's go back to our content drawer. Let's right click. We need to create a new blueprint class. So not under user interface. We got to go to blueprint class for this one. And we got to search under all classes here for drag drop. So drag drop operation. And you see that it says this class is the base drag drop operation for UMG and extend it to add additional data and new functionality. And basically this is what's going to allow us to drag and drop our ability as opposed to just any generic thing. So we'll create a new drag and drop operation, and I'll come back into that and then I'll just rename it, and this is going to be ability drag. So we'll go into that. And so here we have to define all the variables that we're going to pass along with our drag and drop operation. So I'm going to hit + for our first variable. This is going to be the slot index, and this is going to be an integer. And for all of these, let's make them instance editable and exposed on spawn. And then the next one's going to be ability image. And this is going to be, as always, texture 2D. And it's going to be an object reference, instance editable and exposed on spawn. And then for our variables, we're actually going to have our dragged ability. So what ability are we dragging? And this is going to be our gameplay ability. Gameplay ability, object reference, instance editable, exposed on spawn. Last but not least, we need another variable for from inventory, ? And this is going to be a Boolean. We're not using this yet, but once we build the inventory, then we're going to use it. So instance editable, exposed on spawn. So let's compile and save this. And now we are ready to go back into our widget blueprint for the hotbar slot and put in the drag and drop functionality. So I'll go back to our content drawer and I'll open up our hotbar slot. And let's navigate over to the graph. The first thing we need to do is create a new button style specifically for drag and drop. So let's take our ability style, right click on that, and we'll duplicate it. And I'll call this the dragged over style. And I'll compile and save this so then I can update our dragged over style. And by default, it'll be just like our ability style, except under normal here, under the tint, we got to change the alpha here to be a little bit less transparent. So 0.5. And we're going to keep that as a rounded box. And for the outline settings, just make sure it's fixed radius here. And our outline is all zeros. And our corner radii are 4 by 4 by 4 by 4. Now on the event graph itself, we're going to add an event here, and it's going to be event on drag enter. And it says here, call during drag and drop when the drag enters the widget. And so for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get our dragged over style, get, And then we'll get a reference to our button. It might not be button 138 for you. It might be button something else. But whatever your button is here, we'll get a reference to it. And we're going to set style. And this one down here with the blue. And we'll connect up our dragged over style. We'll connect up here. So we have event on drag enter. We also need event on drag leave. So I'll right click and event on drag leave. And this event is called during drag and drop when the drag leaves the widget. And what I'll do is I'll just copy all of these. I'll paste them down here, but I'll delete out the dragged over style. Connect this up because instead the style we're going to use is our empty button style. So we'll get that and we'll connect this up here. So let's compile and save, and now there are some functions that we need to override. So you see it says functions 36 overrideable. And under override here, we have to say, okay, on mouse down. So on mouse button down. So I selected that. I'm going to drag out, make some space. So what do we want this widget to do on mouse button down? So we're going to have a mouse event, and we're going to detect drag if pressed. And what do we want to detect drag if pressed? Well, it's going to be our left mouse button. Because typically you're holding your left mouse button and then dragging and dropping. Connect this up and connect this up here. Then compile and save. And we need to do this for another function as well, because I noticed that this doesn't actually work. I'm not sure why. But what actually works is if we override on preview mouse button down. So make sure you do the same thing on preview mouse button down. And I'll drag this out, make some space. And what I found out was that in earlier versions of Unreal Engine, the other function worked and now this one works. I don't know what changed, but I just set it for both. So on mouse event here, detect drag if pressed, and we'll connect that up. Once again, it's going to be our left mouse button. Select that and then connect this up here and connect this up here. Let's compile and save. We'll do another function override, and this is going to be on drag detected. So on drag detected. Make a lot of space here. Now this is going to get a little bit confusing, but let's hook it all up and then I'll explain it. Now the first thing we have to do on drag detected is we have to determine, okay, is there an actual ability in that slot? And the way we're going to do that is we're going to get our ability image and we're going to check to see, is that valid? We've done this a lot before. And then we'll branch from that. Connect this up here. Move out our return node. So if the ability image is valid, that means we have an ability in the slot. So if true, that means we're going to create a new widget. And the widget that we're creating is exactly what we already created, which is our dragged ability widget. And that's this dragged ability up here that we created to have a visual representation of dragging our ability icon from one slot to another. And if you remember when we created that, I'll just go over to the graph here. So we have our dragged image, which is a texture 2D, and that is what's our exposed variable down here, our dragged image. Because what we're actually dragging is whatever ability image we have currently. Get, and we'll connect this up. But this is just creating the widget that's dragging the icon. It's not actually the ability itself, and that's why we had to create this ability drag actor. And so I'm going to move over here, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to create a drag and drop operation. And the class that we're actually creating the drag and drop operation for is our ability drag, the new one that we created, ability drag. And when we select ability drag, we see that we get a bunch of other variables. So I'm going to move both of these out, create some space, and I'll get a reference to our hotbar slot, and that's going to be connected to the slot index. Get a reference to our ability image, that's going to be connected up to ability image. And then we have to get a reference to what ability we're actually dragging. And so for that, what we got to do is we got to get our player controller reference. So player controller, get player controller reference. And from that, we have to get our gameplay ability hotbar. Because remember, we're just dragging and dropping from our hotbar at this point. And then from here, we can get a copy. So get copy. And what index do we need? Well, we got to get our hotbar slot from here, connect that up, and then this is getting connected up to dragged ability. We can keep the from inventory false because remember, we're on our hotbar slot right now, and this is the on drag detected function for our hotbar slot. And for the default drag visual, well, that's this dragged ability widget right here. We can connect this up. I'm just going to rearrange these a little bit. The last thing to change is this pivot. So instead of center, just do from mouse down. And then we connect this up to the operation and we connect up our execution pins. And we'll compile and save, and we got one more function to override. So override is going to be on drop. So on drop. So this is what's going to execute when an ability actually gets dropped into the hotbar slot. So I'm going to make some space. And from the operation here, we're going to cast to the ability drag operation that we just set up. And that's going to allow us to get all of our variables. So cast to ability drag. And then connect this up here. And the first thing I'm going to get from as ability drag is from inventory. So is this ability drag from inventory? Now we haven't set up the inventory yet, but we will. And then connect up a branch, move this out. So for now, we're just going to set up the false branch. So right now we're just setting up hotbar to hotbar dragging. So first, we need to get a reference to our player controller. So player controller, come down here, get player controller reference, and we need to call a function. We need to call the move ability within hotbar function. Connect this up, and we have one more function to call. So player controller reference, and we're going to get the move image within hotbar. So both of those functions that we set up, connect this up here. I'm just going to add a reroute node to go right over the head here. And a second one, why not? Move all these down a little bit. Now we got to send in where we're moving it from and from and to here, and swapping. So swapping is just going to be connected up just like this. So this function is determining whether or not we're swapping, and then it's putting that data into the move image within hotbar. And on drop here, so when we're dropping into the slot, so the hotbar slot 2 is just going to be whatever this hotbar slot is. So I'll just get this, connect this up. I'll get another reference to it, connect it up to the 2 here. But our actual ability image that we're passing in and the from, so that's coming from our ability drag operation. So I have to get a reference to that. So I have to get a reference to the slot index. And I also have to get a reference to our ability image. I'll move this down here because the ability image is going to be passed in right there, and our slot index is going to be passed in, well, 2 different places. So here, and then also over here. So I know that's a little bit messy, but we're almost done here. So the last thing we've got to do, I'm going to make some space, and we are going to call the set button style event. So this is the event on our event graph where every time something changes with our buttons, this is where we're changing our button styles. And we set this up in the very first episode. I'll go back to on drop. I'll connect this up to our return node here. And even when we're moving from the inventory, which we're going to set up in the second part of this episode, we're still going to set our button style at the end of that. So if everything's looking good with our on drop operation, we are ready to test this. So let's compile and save. We'll get our 3 abilities and we'll try swapping them out using I on our keyboard. All right, so here's the moment of truth. So we pick up our abilities. We got all 3 of them, hit I on our keyboard, and then, okay, can I drag? Yep, it's dragging. Can I drop? Drag and drop here, drag and drop there. Let's try dragging it back over. All right, now let's try using these abilities. 4, 2, that's looking good. 7, 2, yep, everything seems to be in order, except for me spamming the wrong keyboard buttons. Now for the second half of this episode, we're going to be focused on creating an ability inventory. So basically a place where we can drag and drop abilities from our hotbar to the inventory. We don't want to get rid of them completely, but we just want to keep them out of the way. And then we can always drag them back into our hotbar when we want to use those abilities. So we're going to start by creating some new UI widgets. So let's go over to our content drawer, and in our UI folder, I'm just going to right click on the hotbar slot. We're going to duplicate, and we're going to call it the ability inventory slot. And then we're also going to create a brand new widget blueprint that's the equivalent of our ability hotbar here. So I'm going to right click, and we're going to go to user interface widget blueprint, and it's going to be a user widget. And this is going to be our ability inventory. So let's go into the ability inventory slot first, and we'll update that. So for our inventory, we can simplify this relative to our hotbar quite a bit. So the first thing is we don't need any text. So let's delete out that from the hierarchy. And then let's navigate over to the graph. So we don't need this cannot activate that we set up last episode. So let's delete out all that. So let's compile and save, and then we can also delete out the cannot activate style and the cannot activate style no ability. We can also delete out this on clicked event, delete out that, compile and save again, and then we can get rid of our number on keyboard. We don't need that. And then let's come up here to our set button style event. This is going to be simpler as well because we don't need to assess whether or not the slot's activated. So we can just get rid of these 2. We can move this up right here. We just need to assess, is there an ability in the slot? Connect this up. Let's compile and save again, and then we can delete out our last variable, slot activated. We won't need that. The last thing is I'm going to change the name of hotbar slot here. So instead, this is going to be inventory slot. And let's compile and save. So now let's go into our ability inventory widget, and we'll actually construct the inventory. So content drawer and ability inventory. Now for most other tutorials out there, they just create an inventory that's like 6 spots or 9 spots at most. And unfortunately, we're going to do 25 spots, but you can make this as small or as large as you want. And even though we're not aiming for our final game product right now, we're just aiming for this gameplay prototype, I still want the player to feel like they're not limited by their inventory. So the first thing we're going to do is select ability inventory, and we're going to change the visibility from not hit testable to visible. And then we have to construct our hierarchy. And this is going to be a little weird, so I'll explain what we're doing. So size box, that's going to be the very first thing. And then the next thing we're doing is a vertical box. And make sure to put that within the size box. And then within the vertical box, we're going to have a border. Move that in. Within the border, we're going to have a horizontal box. This is all going to make sense. Oh, messed that up. Drag it to border. And then within the horizontal box, we're going to have another size box. And finally, within the size box, we are going to have a button and this is going to be our close inventory button. And then within the button, we're going to have a text component. Drag that over to button, and that's just going to be a simple X. But we're not done here. So this top bar of our inventory is going to be just the ability to close it, basically. But within our vertical box, we're going to have another set of options, and that's going to be where our actual buttons are. So we're going to start by adding another border, and this is going to be to our vertical box. So these two border components should be on the same level. And then within our border here, because we're doing 25 buttons, we're going to have a uniform grid panel. Select that, drag that in, and now comes the fun part, 25 slots. So for that, we got to go to our user created widgets here, and we can get our ability inventory slot. We could drag that into the uniform grid panel, and the next thing we got to do is we have to copy that, well, 24 times. So Control C, Control V, 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 as in vendetta. So you want to do it up to 24, because that's actually 25 because the first one doesn't have a number. Next thing I'm going to do, change fill screen to desired on screen. And then we have to make updates to this whole hierarchy. So the first thing, our size box, I'm going to change the size. So the width and the height, I'm going to change the width to 400 and the height to 450. Then I'm going to select our border, our first border here. And for the brush color, so not the tint here, but for the brush color, I'm going to change the alpha to 0. Then I'm going to select the size box, and this is going to be set size to fill, and then our horizontal alignment is going to be to the right. And then for the button, I'm actually going to right click, rename this. This is going to be our close inventory button. And I'm also going to change the background color for our button. So that's going to be 000 alpha 0.25, so very dark. Then over to our text, we're going to change our text to just be an X, a capital X. Now on to our next border, and for the border here, we're going to set our size to fill. And for our border here as well, we're going to do a brush color of 000 alpha 0.25. So now we've got to arrange all of our slots, and this is time consuming. So this is where you might decide, well, I'm going to have fewer slots in my inventory. Totally fine. So for the first one, our row 0, column 0, inventory slot 0. That's totally fine. But for our next one, so this is going to be a little weird. So it's still on row 0, but it's going to be column 1. This is inventory slot 1. And for our second one, it's going to be column 2, inventory slot 2. And you see it start to build that way because it's our uniform grid panel. And on to 3, it's going to be column 3, inventory slot 3. And on to 4, column 4, inventory slot 4. But now, once we get to 5, then we got to put it down to the next row. So we're going to do row 1, column still going to be 0, inventory slot 5. So the inventory slot is always going to match the number here. And the uniform grid panel is just separating them out evenly. So inventory slot 6, this is going to be row 1, column 1, inventory slot 6. Slot 7, 1, column 2, inventory slot 7. And if you make a mistake, it's going to be very easy to correct the rows and columns because you're going to see a box out of place. But one thing to really make sure you get right is these inventory slots here. Because if we get the inventory slot here wrong, when we drag and drop an ability into that slot, then it's not actually going to be in that slot. It's going to be in a different slot. Ability inventory slot 8, it's going to be 1, 3, 8. 9, 1, 4, 9. Then on to the next row. Row 2, 0, 10. Row 3. So once you got your panel looking like this, what I would do is I just go through every slot and just make sure the inventory slot's correct. You're going to see if something's in a position that it shouldn't be, and that's going to be our rows and columns. But like I said, very easy to get our inventory slots wrong. And then compile and save. So now let's go over to our graph tab. And we'll come up here a little bit, we'll create a new variable. So our variable is going to be titled inventory visible. And this is going to determine whether or not our inventory is visible at any given moment in time. So we're going to change this to kind of a weird type. So it's an eSlate visibility. And then I'll compile and save, and then we'll change the inventory visible to, by default, be hidden. So we'll compile and save again, and then we'll go to the designer tab, and we need to select the size box that's at the very top of the hierarchy. So everything should be within this size box. And then under behavior here for visibility, we need to bind this to our new variable, inventory visible variable. And that's going to allow us to activate our inventory from our third person character blueprint, basically using any button we like. And now let's go back to our graph. So just like other widget blueprints, we got to set up all of our references here. So I'm going to delete out event pre-construct, event tick. We're not going to need those. Make some space for event construct. And we'll start by getting our player controller. So get player controller. And I could drag out a pin here. We're going to cast to my player controller, and that's the player controller that we created at the very first of this series on UI. And we can right click, promote this to a variable, and this is going to be our player controller reference. Then we can do the same thing for our player character. So get player character, drag out a pin from here, and we'll cast to BP third person character, connect this up, promote this to a variable. I'm going to call this our character reference. And last thing I'm going to do, drag out a pin from this as BP third person character. We can get a reference to our HUD, and we've set that up. I think it was first episode in this series. Yep. And then from here, we can right click, promote this to a variable. And we'll keep it HUD reference. That's fine. Compile and save. So now we have the arduous process of building an array with our 15 buttons. And for this, the only tip I've got is you can hold control for each one of these to drag in a reference. And it's still going to take a little while. So just drag in a reference for every single one of these, and then we'll construct an array. Make sure you don't miss one. All right, so now I'm going to line them all up directly underneath each other, no spaces. And start with the one without a number and work your way down. Oh, I did 12 twice. Yep, double check, make sure you don't have any duplicates. And then from our very top one, we can drag out a pin and we can make an array. And we just need to add pin 24 times, all the way down to 24, and then connect all of them up. Make sure the numbers match. Looking good. Okay, so I can drag out all of these, move them over here, and we are going to promote our array to a variable. Connect this up here, and this is going to be called, instead of array, our ability inventory buttons. Now it's over to our HUD, and we can connect up our inventory to our HUD. So let's go to content drawer, let's go over to our HUD. And for this, once again, we're dragging in a user-created widget. This is our ability inventory now. And we can position that, we can basically drag it in wherever we want it. And I'm going to put it right about there, bottom right-hand corner. And just make sure it's on the same level as our ability hotbar, just within our canvas panel. The other thing to do is make sure size to content here is checked. And under anchors, I'm just going to go ahead and select the bottom right-hand corner as our anchor. And then compile and save. And now it's time to integrate this all with our third-person character. So we can just press our I or whatever keyboard button you want, and our ability inventory will come up. So let's navigate to our content drawer, and then for me, my third-person character is under content, and then the core folder, my third-person character. And I'll go back over to our event graph. And then I'm going to come down to the bottom here. We set this up in the first episode of this series where we hit I. And in that episode, we use keyboard button I to basically activate our mouse cursor so we could hover over any of our hotbar buttons. And we're going to keep all of that set up. But we're also going to allow the X that's in the top right corner of our inventory to basically turn off our inventory system. And so for that, we're going to create a custom event. So right click, custom event. And this is going to be called our clicked to close ability inventory. And then for this custom event, I'm just going to hook it up right here to the flip-flop. So now we need to call this event when we click the X in our ability inventory. So for that, I'll go back to our ability inventory. And I'll come back down underneath our event construct. And we have to find our close inventory button right here. And when that's clicked, so we can hit plus to have an event. So it's very simple. We can get a reference to our character. And from our character, then we can call the click to close, and connect this up. And then I'll give this a comment. This is going to be clicked to close ability inventory. So let's compile and save. Let's navigate back to our third-person character. And we just have a little bit of setup remaining here. And that is to get a reference to that eSlate variable that we created. So back in the inventory, we created this inventory visible eSlate visibility here. We need to get a reference to this to switch in our third-person character our overall inventory to either be visible or hidden. So I can start by getting a reference to our HUD. So that's our HUD reference. And then from the HUD reference, we can get a reference to our ability inventory. Get ability inventory. And then from our ability inventory, we can drag out a pin and get a reference to our inventory visible variable, set inventory visible. And we can connect that up here. And then we can copy and paste that down below. And we also need to connect it up again because up here it's going to be visible, but down here, when we're setting show mouse cursor to false, it's going to be hidden. And then we can compile and save. I'm going to move these out just a little bit. And I'll also make some space between these two events. Just going to add a comment to this whole thing. And the comment is going to be, you know what, I'm just going to copy and paste from my notes. How about that? There we go. Open and close inventory with I and make it interactable with mouse cursor when opened. So we'll compile and save, and we are ready to test the inventory. All right, so ready to hit I. There's our inventory, and we can hover over and it's interactable. And can we hit the X and it closes? Yep, closes out. And I again, I toggles on or off. That's good. What happens when we drag and drop an ability, though, into our inventory? Nothing, because we haven't set up any of that functionality. So that's what we're going to do for the final part of this episode. So to start, we got to go back into our player controller, and we need to set up a new variable to accompany our gameplay ability hotbar. And this one is going to be our gameplay ability inventory. And it's going to be the same type, though. So type is going to be gameplay ability, and then it's going to be an object reference, and right-click on it to make it into an array. Compile and save the blueprint, and then we're going to add 25 array elements. So lots of left-clicking. Index up to 24. Next, we're going to create functions for moving from the hotbar over to the inventory. So we're going to start by duplicating our move ability within hotbar function. So I'm going to right-click and then duplicate. And this is going to be move ability from hotbar to inventory. And now we just have to substitute some stuff. So I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to move this out a little bit. So our gameplay ability hotbar right here, I'm just going to delete this out and instead replace it with our gameplay ability inventory. And the same thing down here, I'm going to delete out hotbar and replace it with inventory, because what we're checking with this new function is the space that we're moving to, and that's in our inventory, is that a valid index, meaning there's already something in there. And so if I come over here to the right, we just got to replace a couple more of these things. So from gameplay ability hotbar here, we're deleting that out, replacing it instead with our inventory. And then also down here, so this reference to our gameplay ability hotbar, that's going to be removed and replace it with inventory. But this one we're keeping the hotbar reference because that's what this function's doing. It's moving from the hotbar to our inventory. All the rest of it looks good. Compile and save. So now we're going to do the same thing with our move image within hotbar function. So we'll right click on that, we'll duplicate, and this is going to be move image from hotbar to inventory. So this one is a little bit more arduous. So instead of our hotbar buttons reference here, what we got to do is we got to get a reference to our inventory buttons. So I'm going to start by getting a reference to our character. And then from our character, we got to get our HUD. And then from the HUD, we got to get our wonderful inventory, ability inventory. And from our inventory, we finally get our inventory buttons. And then from here, I'm going to get, and the get a copy is going to be from our local 2 right here. And just so that we don't have to trace this crazy set of reference steps, just like our hotbar buttons reference, I'll select all this, right click, and collapse to macro. And this is going to be our inventory buttons reference. And then from this get, I'm going to get our ability image, get ability image. I'm going to connect that up to the local temporary image. And then basically what we need to do is we need to hook this up here, but it's not going to allow us to do that because we need to set the ability image on our inventory buttons. So set ability image and set, and that's what's going to replace this right here. So we can delete out this, move this down. Sorry guys, this is just messy. Connect this up, and it's really easy to make mistakes on this, so try to be careful. Connect this up here. And then these, so the hotbar buttons reference, we can delete that, this, and that, and keep our local 2 inventory buttons reference, all of this stuff. All of this stuff related to the hotbar can remain exactly the same. And now we'll come down to the false. So for this, once again, we got to switch it out with our inventory buttons reference. And then from this, we can get, and actually we got to do 2 gets, so I'll copy and paste it twice, connect it up like this. And one's going to be from our local from, and one's going to be from our local 2. And from the local from, this is where we're going to set our ability image. So ability image and set. And that one's going to be blank. And then the local 2 here, we're going to set ability image again. And that one is going to be the local ability image. So actually, let's do this. Let's delete out those 2. Let's delete out all of this. And we'll connect this up here, connect the false to this. And then finally, connect this to this. Let me just trace through this so you got it exactly. So move image from hotbar to inventory. Got our inventory buttons. We're getting the image. We're setting a local temporary ability image. And then after we save what's here, then we're replacing what's here with the local ability image that we're passing through. And that's coming from our hotbar to our inventory. And then we're taking that local temporary ability image from our inventory buttons, and then we're swapping it onto our hotbar. And that's being done right here. Down here, it's a lot simpler because there isn't anything to swap. And actually, I made a mistake here because it's not our inventory buttons that we're sending it from, right? It's our hotbar for this function. So I got to get a reference to our hotbar buttons. I have to get from there, and this is how easy it is to mess this up. And then we connect this up here. We connect this up to set ability image, and that's from our hotbar buttons. Connect this up down here. So we'll delete out this. So just trace through all of this, guys. Just make sure you've got it, and then we'll move on. So then let's compile and save. And now that we've set up our actual ability inventory and these two functions, we have a few things to do to receive those functions on the ability inventory slot. So let's go back to that and let's go over to the graph tab. So we need to go into the drag and drop and the on drag detected function. And if dragging an ability is detected from the ability inventory slot, then we need to make sure to check off this from inventory here. Actually, that's going to come into play when we drag back from our inventory into the hotbar, but we're going to do that in just a bit. The other thing we got to switch out here is instead of getting our gameplay ability hotbar, we need to instead, from our player controller, get our gameplay ability inventory. And I'll delete out this, I'll delete out this, and then from that, we'll get a copy from our inventory slot and hook this up here. Just going to rearrange this stuff, make it a little neater. Let's compile and save, and the last thing we need to do is modify the onDrop function. And when we duplicated this from our hotbar, we already had move ability within hotbar and move image within hotbar. But now we need to swap those out with the move ability from hotbar to inventory functions. But before we do that, the spaghetti here, it's getting a little overwhelming. So let's instead create some local variables first, and then we'll update these functions. So from as ability drag, first thing I'm going to do is move from inventory down. I'm going to drag all this stuff out a little bit. Same with our return node here. And I'll get everything here, move this all out. And then as ability drag, we can get a reference to our slot index. We're going to promote that to a local variable. And we're going to call that our local slot index. I'll move this over to the left, connect this up. And then we've got one more thing we've got to get. We're going to get our ability image. And this we're also going to promote to a local variable. Connect this up. And this one's going to be our local ability image. Connect this up here. So now what we can do is going to be a little bit easier to manage. So I'm going to duplicate our inventory slot. We're going to connect this up here. Going to make a little bit more space here. And instead of our slot index, we can get our local slot index get, connect this up here. And then we can also do the same thing, paste it over there, connect it there. In our player controller, I'm going to duplicate that as well. Connect this up like this. And last but not least, our ability image, I'll delete that out and we'll get our local ability image and we'll connect that up right here. Then I can delete out this slot index, bring these closer together, and delete out that pin, connect this up. And that's looking a lot cleaner. Add a little reroute for the Boolean. These two I'm going to drag up here because they're also going to be connected for these functions when we're moving from the inventory to the inventory. But now we actually have to switch out these functions. So the move ability within hotbar, instead we're going to move ability from hotbar to the inventory, because this again is on our ability inventory slot. Connect these up, swapping connected down here. This one, same thing. So player controller reference, move image from hotbar to inventory. Connect these up, rearrange these just a little bit. Inventory slot is the to and the local slot index is the from. Local ability image. Connect this up here, much better. Compile and save. So dragging from our hotbar to our inventory should work now. All right, we start by picking up our abilities here. We got our abilities. We can still drag from our hotbar slots to our hotbar slots. So far, so good. Dragging over to our actual inventory. There we go. And dragging over here. There we go. And over there. Yep, so far, so good. But if I drag from inventory to inventory, not so good. So that's not yet working. So that's what we'll do next. So we'll go back to our controller. And once again, we're going to duplicate the move ability within a hotbar. So right click duplicate. And this one is going to be move ability within inventory. And I just want to mention that you might consider doing this a little bit differently if you want to challenge yourself. It might be a little bit more elegant. Instead of having 8 functions, which we're going to end up having because we're moving from the hotbar to inventory, hotbar to hotbar, et cetera, what you could do is you could pass through what you're actually moving from, like the hotbar, and what you're moving to, and just have a single function and do it that way, or just 2 functions, one for the ability and one for the image. And that'd probably be a little bit more elegant, but I figured I'd do this piece by piece and we just make it work every step of the way. But if I needed to add a third place where we're moving our abilities to, in that case, I'd probably want to simplify this drastically. But I'm sticking with what's going to be the 8 functions for now. So for this, the move ability within inventory, we're going to substitute all of our references to gameplay ability hotbar, going to substitute all of those with gameplay ability inventory. And that's pretty straightforward. Now our next one, once again, not going to be straightforward, but this one, not too bad. And just make sure you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different references. Compile and save. And next, you know what's next. We're going to duplicate the move image within Hotbar. So we're going to duplicate that, and that's going to be move image within inventory. And for this one, we're doing the same exact thing, but unfortunately, substituting our references here is a little bit more arduous. So if I connect this up here, can't do it. So we just got to do another get. And then from that, we have to get our ability image. What I try to do is I try to do this right above what we're replacing so that I can trace out exactly what we're replacing. Set ability image, and it's going to be something like that. Something like that. And we can delete out all this. We can delete out this. Connect this up here. Move all these down. How's that? A little bit cleaner? Just make sure you've got local to and local from here correct, because I find that I mix those up pretty frequently. All right, down here we're going to do the same exact kind of thing. Get local from, get local to, set ability image, get our local ability image, set ability image here, and that one's going to be blank. I think we can delete out all of this now. Move this up, connect it up here. If you got all that, then compile and save. And let's go back to our ability inventory slot, because what we got to set up is we got to set up from inventory true right here. So we can get a reference to our player controller again, and then from our player controller, we can move ability within inventory. Connect up our true, and I'll get another player controller reference, and this is going to be move image within inventory. And then connect this up here. Swapping is going to go down here. Add a reroute for the swapping. And then we just need the same kind of thing as down here. Local slot index, inventory slot. Connect this up here. Connect the inventory slot there. Same thing over here. Connect it up here. Connect it up here. And the ability image, local ability image. And last but not least, connect this up set button style. Let's compile and save. And we are ready to test this out. Inventory to inventory. All right, so retesting over to inventory. That looks good. That looks good. That looks good. And inventory to inventory. Yep, so far so good. But what happens when we drag it back over to our hotbar? Nothing. So that's our last two functions. So our two functions for moving from our inventory back to our hotbar. We're going to start by duplicating our movability from hotbar to inventory. Duplicate, and now it's going to be from inventory to hotbar. And this one, as you can guess, we're just switching out one reference for another. So I'm going to drag in our gameplay ability hotbar, switch that out instead of the inventory. Same thing down here. And by the way, I would just double check every bit of this. And I've run through this episode basically twice to make sure I've got it perfect. And I'm still making mistakes along the way. It's very easy to mix these up. All right, down here, hotbar. And our inventory. Compile and save. So now on to the move image function. So this, we're going to duplicate our move image from hotbar to inventory. So right click, duplicate, and it's going to be move image from inventory to hotbar. As you can guess, we're going to have to replicate all of this. Here we go. So hotbar buttons reference, get, just going to build it right above. So let me just trace this through. So if we're swapping, meaning there's something in our hotbar already in that spot, so this is what we're doing. And if there's nothing in that slot, then this is what we're doing. So now we've got to go back to our hotbar slot, and we got to go back to the graph, and we got to go into the onDrop function. So once again, just to clean this up, I'm going to set up local variables. Probably should have done this on the function initially, but I wasn't thinking that far ahead. So I'll drag out a pin, get our slot index, promote this to a local variable. This is going to be our local slot index. Connect this up. And then what I'll do is I'll drag out all of this stuff, and we'll get our one more variable, which is our get ability image. Promote this to a local variable. And that's going to be our local ability image. Now we're ready to connect this up. Move this in a little bit. Player controller can come over here. Slot index, I can delete that out. Hotbar slot is going to be right there. I'm going to duplicate that, move it over here, Boolean reroute, ability image, delete that, get a reference to our local ability image, move that in over here, duplicate our player controller. Last thing is getting our local slot index and get, and that's our from, and then pasting that also here. Looking good. I'm just going to move up the set button style up here a little bit because now we can get a reference to our player controller again. And from there, we're going to move ability from inventory to hotbar. Copy both of these, player controller reference again, and move image from inventory to hotbar. Connect this up, and then I've just got to pull in our local slot index, our hotbar slot, and then our swapping, reroute, last but not least, our local ability image. So if you've got all that on drop on your hotbar slot, compile and save, and we are ready for, we're close to done. Moment of truth. So we got our fireball over there. We've got our torch over here. We've got our flamethrower over here. And now we'll mix it up. So we'll put it on 4. We'll put our flamethrower on 8. We'll put our torch on 2, 2, 4, 2. Try spamming 1. Yep. 2, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4. 4, 8, 4, 8, 4, 8. Yep. If I hit 5, it deactivates it. Move it back over to our inventory. Move this over. It is looking good. Now, I strongly suggest that at each step of this, you test because it's really easy to mix up those variables. But the other troubleshooting tip I have is that often I would mess up one function, but not the other. So I would mess up the move image function, but not the move ability function. So check to see if your abilities are moving and maybe your icon's not moving, or maybe the formatting of the button is off. And those are all things that we took a look at in previous episodes. So here's the last thing I want to figure out this episode, which is when our hotbar is actually full, how do we get it so that the ability is still picked up, but it goes into the inventory, if there's space in our inventory? So for that, we got to go back to our third-person character blueprint, and let's trace through the logic of what happens when an ability is actually picked up. So first it does a hotbar check, and it returns, does it have space in the hotbar? If true, then it picks up the ability. And then it does all the stuff with the Niagara system asset. But if false, that's what we got to set up now. So once again, we got to set up a couple new functions on the My Player controller. I know you're just about functioned out. We are almost done with functions, I assure you. So I should have named the pickup ability function. I should have specifically named this pickup ability on hotbar. So that's what we're going to make it now. But before we duplicate this to be pickup ability on inventory, we're going to duplicate two other things. We're going to duplicate our hotbar check, and this one is going to be our inventory check. Get rid of the _0. And we're going to duplicate the find empty hotbar slot. So duplicate find empty inventory slot. And last but not least, finally, our pickup ability on hotbar, we're going to duplicate that, and it's going to pick up ability on inventory. And we're going to create two new variables, so +sign here, and we're going to create a variable that's a Boolean, has inventory space, and that's very similar to our has hotbar space. Change this over to Boolean, not an array, so right click on that. And then our next one is going to be empty inventory slot, and that is going to be an integer. So let's go over to our inventory check function first. The only thing we're doing here is switching out two references. So we switch out our gameplay ability hotbar with our gameplay ability inventory. We switch out has hotbar space with has inventory space, but the same exact thing. Duplicate that, check it off here, and connect up to the break. And also down here, make sure not to forget this one. Has inventory space, connect it up. So next we're on to find empty inventory slot. Same thing, so switching out our references. Empty inventory slots go in here. And then also switch it out here. And then finally over to our pickup ability on inventory. Switch this out with our inventory reference. We also got to switch out the find empty hotbar slot here. We got to find instead an empty inventory slot. Connect this up. Switch out our empty hotbar slot here with our empty inventory slot. But before we connect it up, instead of our hotbar buttons reference, we have to get our inventory buttons reference. And once again, get, connect this up, set our ability image, connect it up just like this, the ability icon, connect up here. And then from here, we got to set our button style. Connect up here. Now we can delete out these. Now we'll compile and save, and back in our third-person character blueprint, So now from the false pin here, this is where we're going to add the logic. So first I'm going to get a reference to our player controller. And from here, this is going to first do an inventory check. So this is the function we just created. That checks to see, does our inventory have space? If it does have space, it returns true. So we'll branch out there. And then if it's true here, we're going to pick up the ability in the inventory. But for that, I need another reference to our player controller. And I could do pick up ability on inventory. True. And if I do pick it up successfully that way, then we're going to want to set our pickup Niagara system to basically be inert. So I'm going to move those out, and then I can connect it up here. And then for this false, so that would mean that our hotbar has no space, our inventory has no space, then what do we want to have happen? And what I would say is, in that case, we don't want to do this, right? We want to keep the pickup actor there. And I would just say that the gameplay ability itself that gets spawned, well, let's destroy that because we don't want endless gameplay abilities spawning. And we got to hook up that gameplay ability anyway right here. So let's drag out a pin from our gameplay ability pickup. We'll drag out and we'll do a reroute. And that's our top one up here. And from this, we can connect this up here, put in another reroute. And then from here, we're going to destroy the actor, destroy actor. And this is what's going to get connected up to the false pin. So this is a little bit convoluted, so I just want to comment the entire thing. So the top left, so this is going to be attempt to pick up ability on hotbar. Over here, we'll comment that as well. If successfully picks up the ability, sets the pickup actor to be inert. Down here, I'll make some more space. Attempts to pick up ability in the inventory. And finally, down here, make some more space. If cannot pick up the ability, destroys the ability. Doesn't destroy the pickup actor, just the ability. So we're not destroying the ability pickup actor reference. So let's compile and save, and I really do think this might be our final test, at least of this episode. But before we test, let's duplicate a ton of our pickup actors. Let's just get about 15. You know, you can make as many as you want, really, but you could even test this out by making too many for the inventory. I mean, that's going to be a ton, but I'm just interested in making sure that the pickup abilities in inventory actually work. So what are we up to now? That looks like it's about 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is 11. Yeah, one more. That should do it. Move out my player start. You know, I didn't know this until literally this week, but I can literally right click anywhere in the level. I could just right click and I could say, where is it? I can say play from here. There it is under preview. I didn't know that until last week, all thanks to our Discord. All right, we got our 16 candles here. For those of you that didn't grow up in the 80s, that's before your time. All right, I'm just gonna run over each of them and here we go. I didn't grow up in the 80s. I'm not that old. We look at our ability hotbar and it's totally full. If we look in our inventory, yes. And I can drag and drop our additional. Let's try dragging one over here, dragging over there. It's dragging our fireball back. If I hit 9 on the keyboard, yep. It's looking good. We got our flamethrower. We got our actual torchlight. We got a lot of torchlights. Yeah. So for the final segment of this episode, let's just clean up all the stuff, the crazy amount of stuff that we did on the My Player controller. So I'm going to take all of these functions, every single one, and we're going to categorize these under our gameplay ability UI. And unfortunately, I don't know of a way of doing this in bulk with functions. I'm sure there's a way with C++, maybe even behind the scenes, but we only have about 12 functions. So before you get carpal tunnel, you could just do it 12 times. I'm going to do the same thing with our variables down here. So starting with empty hotbar slot, category gameplay ability UI. Not our character reference, but the hotbar variables definitely, and the inventory variables definitely. I think that's good. Gameplay ability hotbar and the inventory, I think those are sufficiently important that we don't need to classify them under something. And there's one last thing you could do with this overall hotbar and inventory system that I thought about doing, but I decided not to. And I'll probably end up doing this in the future, but it's less important to just get a prototype of gameplay up and running very quickly. And that is the fact that as it currently stands, there's no way to actually remove abilities completely from either the inventory or the hotbar. And what I thought about doing was creating basically a garbage widget, like maybe next to our inventory or above it, where you can just drag and drop something into that widget and it would be destroyed. But now that you know the basics, feel free to try that out for yourself. So one last issue fix I want to go over, guys, and that is I noticed that if I have a gameplay ability activated, I can still drag and drop it even when it's activated. And then I can't deactivate it again until I drag it back into that slot. And I noticed even then it causes issues with activation and deactivation. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to completely disable drag and drop for our abilities if any ability is active, even if we're dragging and dropping from the inventory, because potentially we could drag and drop from the inventory into the hotbar and then mess up an activated ability. And so to fix that, it's very easy. So we're going to go back into our hotbar slot, and specifically we need to go into the onDragDetected function. And we actually need to do this also for the inventory slot, but let's start with the hotbar slot and go from there. So I'm going to get a reference to our third person character. And from this, we can get our activated gameplay ability. And that's a variable that we set up all the way back in episode 26. And then I'll move this down here. And basically, if our activated gameplay ability is valid, then we don't want it to be able to do a drag and drop. So I can just say not to this, not Boolean. And then what I'll do is I'll hook up both this and the not. So both of those things need to be true in order to be able to go forward with the onDragDetected. Move this over here and over there. So we'll compile and save this, and then what I'll do is I'll just copy this exact same thing. We'll go over to our ability inventory slot on drag detected, and we'll do the exact same thing. Paste this in, do a quick and, move all this stuff out. The not connects up here, and the and connects up to the condition. So only if the ability image is valid and we do not have an activated gameplay ability at the present moment. Compile and save. Last test. For real this time. Got our gameplay abilities. Let's activate our torchlight. Let's try dragging. Nope, we can't drag a thing. And deactivate. Can we drag? Yes, we can. Awesome. So let's activate our flamethrower. Try dragging and dropping from our inventory. Can't do it. Deactivate. Then we can drag and drop just fine. Perfect. Drag and drop our fireball. Excellent. So personally, guys, I am relieved that this series of episodes is done. In all fairness, we got another episode coming out. I'll probably do it the day after this one, which is just my really quick and easy way of creating gameplay ability icons. And I don't think this will be the final state of what we're going to do for our gameplay ability icons, but it's definitely enough at least to get gameplay up and running. So I hope to see you there.